Hello, my name is Dr. Wilma, and welcome to my webinar. My topic today is taking the lead role for your entire self. I'll be discussing the 4 different aspects of yourself, including physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. I hope you enjoy the episode.
So my name is Ines Quandel. I'm the VP of Communications with WomenIN. I just wanted to welcome everyone for connecting with us today on our WomenIN Wednesday webinar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief outline of what we're going to do during the webinar hour. So first, I'm going to provide you with some housekeeping information. Also, I'm going to introduce you to our sponsors, tell you a little bit about WomenIN, and then I'm going to introduce our key speaker, Dr. Wilma Slenders. Also, I wanted to let you know that we have a number of prizes from our sponsors, and we're going to be holding a prize draw next week for those people who have registered as WomenIN members. So at this point, you do still have time to register as a WomenIN member, and you can go to our website at womenin.ca to do that. For the housekeeping issues, Wilma is going to provide the presentation, but if you have questions, please go ahead and go to the chat icon at the bottom. You can open that up and then you can type in your questions. We have someone who's going to be monitoring that and who can pose those questions to Dr. Wilma. We're also going to ask that everybody is going to turn their cameras off and please be on mute. It's just to make sure that we are all able to see the presentation. And the other part of that is we are going to be recording this presentation. So we'd like to make sure that we reduce any kind of background noise and any of the distractions. As for our sponsor, we want to thank very much Tricon Solutions, Solve Strips, Matthew Kellerman, Enta Solutions Inc., ELF Solutions Inc., Coldwell Banker Complete Real Estate, Transcend Management Advisors Inc., Your Soul Beyond, and also MegaPixx Media and Calgary's Business. They've been really great sponsors to us. They've helped us put together the webinars. And like I said, they've also donated some prizes for you guys. So for the introduction to ourselves, WomenIN is a 2020 Calgary founded group that prepares women to transform the future by bringing the strength of your highest and your whole self to every single day. We align with women ages 20 plus and with our hub of services, events, networking, and leadership, which includes a series of webinars. So today's webinar is talking about full circle caring and compassion, and it's going to be led by Dr. Wilma Slenders. And what she's going to be doing is bringing together some of the themes that we've already gone through in the previous 4 webinars, talking about things like empathy, leadership, physical and emotional self-care, as well as spiritual wellness. Dr. Wilma is the owner of Transcend Management Advisors. She's a certified coach and she has a PhD in organization and management with a leadership specialization. Her passion is to help people perform better, to grow faster, and to achieve more. And in her free time, her and her husband, Victor, love to travel, and they love to spend time in the mountains and near the ocean, going hiking, biking, and kayaking. And she says the only 2 continents that she hasn't visited yet are Antarctica and South America. So I'm kind of a little envious of where she's probably got to travel around the world. Anyways, without further ado, we're going to go over to Dr. Wilma Slenders.
Thanks so much, Ines, and thank you to WomenIN for the opportunity to speak with you today. It's a bit ironic that I'm speaking on the topic of self-care and self-compassion, as these are some things that personally I haven't been the best at for most of my life. It's also ironic that my social media strategist decided to put "learn from the expert" on my speaking card promoting this session. I suppose that I am, as I've learned the hard way, how important that self-care and self-compassion are to my success. I've worked too hard, played too hard, done too many things where self-care and compassion weren't really part of my scenario. You're experts too, and I encourage you to share your experiences, thoughts, and questions in the chat box. I'd like to make this as interactive as we can, given the scenario that we have. Today, I'm going to invite you to explore your beliefs about self-care and self-compassion. I'm going to talk about the importance of both, and then recap, as Ines mentioned, themes, hence the full circle aspect that other people have talked about in terms of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of ourselves. Initially, I thought I knew what I was going to present today, but when I dug deeper into this topic, I realized that there was actually quite a lot more to this than I originally expected. So I did some research on self-care and self-compassion and how they relate to each other. And it's a little bit different than I originally thought. What I found is that self-compassion is the foundation for self-care. So we need to be compassionate for ourselves before we actually can move into really taking care of ourselves. So there's a belief system that underlies self-compassion and that will promote us actually to take better care of ourselves. So before we get into the presentation, I have a few questions for you. The first is, do you love yourself? By that I mean fully, completely, wholly, warts and all, bad hair days, COVID 10 pounds. Do you love yourself with all your imperfections? Do you ever look in the mirror, point at yourself and say, I love you? Do you ever think to yourself, I'm great, I believe in you? I'd like you to say it with me. Don't worry if anyone will hear you. You're all on mute. I love me. I love me. How does that sound? How does it feel? I'd like you to put your comments in the chat box, and Ines will gather them and report back to me. So please take a couple of minutes to just respond back. How did it feel to say, I love me? Ines, what are you seeing?
Hi, WomenIN, Wendy. I'm doing.
Oh, Wendy, sorry, I'm sorry.
No,
Wendy.
don't be at all. We've got some comments here. I feel like I'm saying it to a stranger. I feel confident. Yeah, it's freeing in some way. It's calming. And people are too hard on themselves. I love me every day.
Wow, so quite a wide range of responses. So that's great. I'm interested in the ones I feel like I'm saying it to a stranger or it makes me feel uncomfortable. Sometimes people think that it sounds egotistical, self-promoting, self-absorbed, or maybe even selfish. And in our society, I would say women in particular have been socialized that they need to look out for other people instead of themselves. So they serve others, but they serve themselves last. And that's been taken as appropriate and even expected, which I think is really unfortunate. So another question for you, and I'm going to use a poll for this. So what I'd like you to do is answer this question. Being competitive and pushing ourselves hard is required for success. So it looks like about 50-50. So I'll just launch the poll. I'll share the results. So 54% said yes, being competitive and pushing ourselves hard is required for success. And 46% said no. So I'm going to ask you another question. Being critical and hard on ourselves is a good thing. Yes or no? All right. So 21% of you say yes, and 79% say no. The reason that I ask these questions is that we hear a lot of messages from celebrities, people who've been very successful, people that we admire and who've achieved a lot. And this is the message that we get. We need to be self-critical. We need to push ourselves hard. We need to do that all the time. Harder, harder, harder is better, better, better. We also believe that, or tend to believe, that everything's a competition. So we're competing against other people. We're competing against ourselves. And we need to push ourselves hard. So a lot of people have this belief, and I think it's a belief that's perpetuated by society, but it's totally wrong. Self-criticism makes us weaker in the face of failure because we're already pulling ourselves down, so we don't have the resilience required to be able to pick ourselves up and move forward. Self-criticism, like criticism from other people, tends to make us more emotional. So our self and our self-worth are often tied into that external persona, external perspective, as well as our internal beliefs. And self-criticism makes us less likely to assimilate lessons from our failures. So, interesting topic. What is self-compassion really? And so I did some research on this, and Kristen Neff is a well-known authority on this, has done a lot of research. And I found lots of different descriptions or definitions. This is the one that I thought made the most sense. Self-compassion involves responding in the same supportive and understanding way you would with a good friend when you have a difficult time, fail, or notice something about yourself. It's not self-pity, oh, poor me, the world's against me kind of attitude. It's not self-indulgent. So I'm going to wallow in this. I'm going to indulge my feelings, my negative feelings. And it's not self-esteem. It's self-esteem requires that we feel superior in some way to others. And self-compassion recognizes our innate sameness and connection to others. I'm just going to stop there and ask if there's any comments or questions. Does this match what your definition of self-compassion is? And if it's not, what is your definition?
Just a comment here, Wilma, in the chat box was all too often I think that we're in competition with each other as women, as opposed to supporting each other and building each other up, and someone else says, yes, this is a definition I work with, the self-compassion. Also, it's the fact that I think looking back at some of the other webinars that we've done, that, talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend, not yourself. Yeah, I see this. I have to remind myself to respond to me the same way I would to my best friend.
Yeah.
Self-compassion is being able to forgive myself as well.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So treating ourselves like we would treat a best friend, if you think about it, how often do you do that? I'd just like you to ponder that for a minute. So Kristen Neff talks about 3 components of self-compassion: kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these in terms of a broader definition and what it looks like. Rather than having slides that have a lot of words on them, I've decided to use graphics and photos to explain the concepts. So kindness is about being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than beating ourselves up with self-criticism. And I know for myself, I grew up in a household where my parents, particularly mother, was extremely critical, and she was very controlling. And it was really hard to meet her exacting standards. I felt inadequate a lot. I think after a while, once you keep hearing the same messaging, you start to believe it yourself, even if you didn't initially believe it to start with. When we're kind to ourselves, we soothe and nurture ourselves when we deal with our pain, rather than getting upset that life isn't meeting our needs. So this doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge our problems and shortcomings, because we all have them. But we suspend that judgment so we can do what's necessary to help ourselves. And I'll give you a little example of judgment. So certainly I'm not an expert on this. I've been on a journey, and I still have a long way to go, as I realized this morning. So last week, I made a short little video for WomenIN for today's webinar. And it came up on LinkedIn this morning, and I looked at it. And the first thing I thought, wow, you look kind of old in that. You look kind of old in that video. Wow. And maybe you shouldn't have worn that red dress, because it's maybe a little bit tight, and maybe not as flattering as it could be. And on and on. And then I had to just stop myself, because I could feel the trigger of, you're not good enough. And you didn't show up in the right way. I could hear those little voices in my head come back. And I was thinking about, okay, well, I'm working on this presentation on self-compassion, but here I am not even showing self-compassion to myself. And so how am I going to talk about this? And it's been actually quite an awareness for me preparing this presentation, because I learned so much as I went through this. And I realized that sometimes maybe I'm not as kind to myself as I should be. The second aspect is common humanity. And this was a kind of a weird term. I thought, well, what does that really mean? And it's about actually recognizing that the human condition is imperfect, and that we're not alone in our suffering. So there's lots of people that are suffering, lots of people going through the same kind of experiences. It's also about realizing that we can't always get what we want. And we can't always be who we want to be either. So this is a shared fact of life with other humans that we reside with on this planet. So, you hear the positivity movement saying you can be anything you want to be. What they forgot to add to the end of that is, within reason, within a context. So I'm not poo-pooing the positivity movement, but there's a reality. So if I grew up on a farm and I didn't go to university, the likelihood that I'm going to be an astronaut is pretty much 0 to none because I haven't taken the actions. So just believing it to be true doesn't necessarily make it so. We actually need to help ourselves move forward. So I'd like this quote: making mistakes is an inevitable part of the human experience. We all make them. It's how you learn and grow from those mistakes that matters. So none of us are perfect, even though some people might like to think they are. Not me. And so we share this with everyone who's around us. The third element of self-compassion is mindfulness. And mindfulness potentially might have a slightly different definition than what we've discussed in the past. So mindfulness in this context is defined as an awareness of present experience with acceptance. So it's actually seeing things for what they are. And it's not suppressing negative emotions, negative experiences. We see them as they are. So a lot of times when things go off the rails, we get into a problem-solving mode immediately, and we don't even know that we're in pain or recognize the need for us to comfort ourselves for the differences or the difficulties we're facing. So being mindful of our suffering is necessary for self-compassion, but we don't want to over-identify with our negative thoughts because it's so easy to be swept away into that vortex of negativity. And again, a personal experience is that I had a few business dealings that didn't go very well. And I went through a lot of self-doubt. I went through negative self-talk. I really started to pay attention to the negativity of the situation. And it's all I could do is think about the situation I got myself in. I couldn't sleep. My head was constantly ruminating about, well, I could have done this. I should have done that. I should have done this. No, that was wrong. Oh, yeah, you should have. Constantly. It was a very painful time for me. And luckily, I was able to get some therapy for that, which shows you how negative that was. But it made me realize that sometimes we just have to acknowledge those situations and then step back. So we step back from it to actually remove the judgment that we're associating with that situation, that negative judgment with the situation. Alternatively, in positive situations, a lot of times we don't acknowledge what's going on either. So as a project manager, one of my last items on the project charter was celebrate success. How many times do we forget to do that? How many times do we end something, it's turned out well, and we go, Next, what we pay attention to grows. So both on the negative or on the positive side. So increasing our awareness in terms of where we are, and then taking that step back is so important in terms of really deciding what you're going to do next. So I'll stop there. I see the chat box light flashing. So I'm going to turn it back to Wendy, see what kind of comments or questions there are.
Well, a lot of people are thanking you very much for sharing your feelings as far as your video and how you were feeling a bit vulnerable there, as well as some how you feel about your inadequacy sometimes. So people are thanking you for that, as well as there was a little comment here, and they were wondering that as far as self-compassion, how do you keep that going? You know, your good messages and stuff. How do you keep that positivity in conflict situations, or when you're feeling angry or down or hurt by people? Just wondering if you had any suggestions there.
Sure.
Like, keeping that positivity going.
I think the couple of things that work for me. Certainly, a lot of times in the morning I get up and I'm not in the best mood, quite frankly. And I tell myself that I have a choice on how I'm going to show up today. And I can show up staying in that bad mood, and basically then I'll see everything that happens that's even potentially negative as a negative thing, or I can choose to change my attitude. And so then it's about, okay, how am I going to show up? And so I'll talk a little bit about later in the self-care section. So there's some things that I like to sing. Not a particularly good singer. I make up my own songs. My husband's not so appreciative of that because I can create a jingle out of anything, but I do that. And so, it's a conscious thing, right? I'll start singing a little song, or, just I notice a trigger and I know I need to do something. So for the first step is really awareness. So where are you? And if you see that it's going down a negative path, then, how can I actually change that before it goes too far down the path? The second thing is that personally, when I'm feeling down about things that are going on in my life, so for instance, my business is, with COVID, it's not doing as well as certainly I hope it would be. And so it's easy to get down on, I find it easy to get down on myself and say, you know what, you're failing. This is not, you've been doing this for 23 years, but maybe you're passe now, maybe your time's over. And again, I can hear that going on in my brain. And then again, I need to stop myself. So sometimes I'll just kind of go, stop. I'll look in the mirror and I'll put my hands up and go, stop. And I'll say, okay, like what's going on here? And then I'll refocus to here's what some of my successes have been, right? So, there's new business coming in, people enjoy working with me. I'm doing some really good work with some clients. So again, it's kind of really stopping it before it goes too far. I like to walk. So my husband and I are trying to, our goal is to walk 5 times a week for at least 30 minutes. So that really helps boost my energy and reduce my anxiety. And that's something when I was doing my, working on my PhD, I woke up every morning feeling anxious. It got to the point where it was debilitating. And I started walking in the morning because I had to release that negative energy. And I found it really, really helped. So I get up at 6 in the morning and I go out for a half an hour walk in the dark in the winter, just to be able to recoup that energy. Other ways is that I have a very good friend who's on this call today, who we're sounding boards for each other. We're mirrors for each other. and we're advisors for each other. So we know that we can call each other at any time and say, hey, not doing so well. Can you help me out? And so that support, sometimes we can do it ourselves, really increase our levels of positivity and self-compassion. Sometimes we need help from other people to support us. And I think that's great. I think that's fine. I think different things work for different people. So I could go on, but I know that I still have some more material I'd like to cover, but those are the kinds of things that I do.
Thank you, Wilma. We've got a couple people, they tend to garden. Someone else likes to make up their own songs. And then someone else had said to be patient with yourself.
Yes. That's a really good one, I would say. And, sometimes we just need to feel those negative feelings. And I think if we don't let them pull us down into the black vortex, then I think it's okay to feel that. I'm really against the positive, persistent positivity, I call it. Like people are always acting happy, but they're not. And for me, it's very frustrating when I'm dealing with people like that, because I know something, or I think, I don't necessarily know, something's going on, but everything's okay, it's all great, but it's not. All right, so I'm going to move on. So I did look at some research because, that's kind of who I am. I like looking at the research and just to see if there were benefits or to self-compassion. So I found quite a few things, a lot of it around motivation to recover from failure. So if we take it easy on ourselves, and we're not necessarily always highly critical, to my question right at the start, then it's just easier kind of to forgive ourselves and say, you know what, it's okay, it's going to be okay, we're going to move on. And I think about there's that famous quote about the gentleman who invented the light bulb. It's like 999 times he learned how it didn't work, right? So to me, that's recovering from failure and stepping up and keeping going. Happiness. Self-compassion is associated with better moods, with feeling better, with taking personal initiative, and also being more curious about the world. Body image. Now, a lot of women, including myself, have dealt with or dealing with body image issues. Going back to the concept of no one's perfect, we're all imperfect. Right at the moment, it is what it is. Self-worth, resilience to adversity. So, going back to the comment about failure, and then reducing psychological distress. Kristen Neff talks about people who are self-compassionate as being less critical of themselves. I know that's a really hard one for me, growing up with the people with my parents who are very critical. It's hard to get out of that conditioning. Certainly that's what I found. They're less likely to be anxious or depressed. And both of those lead to greater life satisfaction, according to Mel. So I'm wondering how you practice self-compassion. So if you'd like to make some comments in the chat box, I'd love to know.
Got someone here. I find the concept of a learning zone versus performance zone really helps. In learning new things, it's okay to make lots of mistakes, as you can learn from those. Then in the performance zone, I can focus on getting everything right.
Wow, that's really great.
Someone
like that.
Someone says they compliment themselves. I'm really bad at that. I need to work on it. So the self-compassion part, hot bath before bed. I agree with that one, and a glass of wine.
Me too.
I'm starting to do 20 to 40 meditations. I committed to taking 20 minutes a day. That is something for me, just me. So, and someone says after our last session last week, they have looked at meditation, daily affirmations. Someone else is agreeing with me with the wine. Start with a deep breath and then stop the conversation in my head. This allows space for looking at the issue outside of my feeling. So sounds a lot of it is just kind of stop and listen to yourself, go inward.
Wow, some really great answers. I just want to make one comment on the affirmations. And I used to use affirmations a lot. And some of you will relate to this. I'd be driving down John Laurie Boulevard to go downtown. And I'd be driving my car and I'd be saying at my loudest voice, "I am great. I am great. I am great." And I say that for probably a minute or so seemed like a minute. And, it just really helped. And, you think about it, well, sounds egotistical. There's all those judgments going through your head, but the reality is I found that affirmations really worked. I use different techniques now, but I just remember, and people looking at me, they couldn't hear me, but that was before the day of everyone having a cell phone and talking on the cell phone, on their cell phone. But kind of looking at me going like, what's going on with her? Anyhow, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. So now I want to move on, one more slide. So you've mentioned, I think all of you have mentioned these items, comfort your body. So taking a bath, wine. So I'm going to quickly go through that. So self-care. So self-compassion is the foundation for self-care. And it's interesting because I thought it was personally the other way around. And so this is where we'll be doing just a little bit of a review of what we've covered in the other webinars. So I'd like to introduce you to a model. It's called a high-performance pyramid. And this is a model that was created by Lauren Schwartz, who they researched why and how high-performance athletes on any given day in a world championship could win. And they wanted to see what the difference was, what was different about the people that won versus the people that didn't. And then they extended the research to corporate leadership. So this is very interesting. I use this a lot with my clients. And so taking the information from other webinars, we see that here's a pyramid. And so at the bottom, physical capacity. So this is building endurance and promoting mental and emotional recovery. So the idea here is that each layer builds on the one before it. And so to really operate well as a human being, they call it ideal performance state, we need to start with that physical capacity. And so these are the things that we know we need to do. Eat 5 or 6 small meals a day, eat breakfast, drink water, be physically active, go to bed early. So the idea here being that we need to rest and recover from what we're doing in our day. So with the recovery phase, biologists have found that the body's hormone, glucose, and blood pressure levels drop every 90 minutes. So if we don't seek recovery, within our activities, we're actually going to put our bodies in a greater stress level. So you'll see the arrows that say rituals. So there are rituals within each of these, again, that will help us excel in each of these different areas. So physical capacity, emotional. So this is really the where our mind's at in terms of how we're thinking about things. So if we go into a competition, now I'll use a different example. I'll use the example of me getting up in the morning. So if I'm feeling down, then that's not going to create an ideal climate for the day. So I need to change that, and I use different kinds of techniques to do it, as I talked about. Mental capacity, so we're focusing physical and emotional energy on the task at hand. So this could also be called intellectual capacity. So we're taking what we've built on, and now we're going to extend it to our intellectual activities. And then the final piece is spiritual capacity. And so this is not about religion, because sometimes people think that's what spirituality is. It's not about religion. It's about your purpose in life, your value. Why are you here? What's your contribution to the world? And so when we have all four of these capacities working together, we're going to do much better than if we just focus on one or two. Now, I'll give you an example. Some of the clients that I work with are high-powered executives. Probably a lot of them focus mostly on their mental capacity, right? Their decision-making, learning, growth and development. Some of them are highly emotionally volatile. So they're the people that yell at other people. They get annoyed with the smallest little things. So their lives are focused on the mental piece, but not so much on some of the other areas. And so it can be, sometimes it's very challenging for them, obviously, in terms of their relationships with other people, but it could also be challenging for them themselves. I'll give you an example. A lawyer that I worked with, if something minor went wrong in his day, he'd be upset for 3 days. So we had a conversation about that. And I said, how does that serve you? Now, this minor thing that impacted you, your EA didn't schedule an appointment or do something, and you're going to be upset for 3 days. How does that serve you? And he took a step back and he said, it doesn't. And so that was happening to him on a regular basis. So one of the things that he and I worked on is how to regulate his emotionality so that he can function better. So, his physical capacity was good because he exercised a lot. Mental was really good. And we also worked on the spiritual capacity in terms of, why was he here? Why did he do the work that he does? What made that important to him? So I actually have covered most of the material I was going to cover in my subsequent slides. So physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. So what I'd like to do at this point is just going back to self-compassion. So this is a tool that we can use, this very short checklist, to see how we're doing. And so you could use this every night before you go to bed. You could journal it. You could do it first thing in the morning. Could be any of those. So the first question, am I being kind and understanding to myself? Second, do I acknowledge shortcomings and failure as experiences shared by everyone? And am I keeping my negative feelings in perspective? So before we finish, and I do have a couple of other slides, but we're getting towards the end. I have an invitation for you to write yourself a love letter. And I'd like you to take some time, maybe 10 or 15 minutes today, to sit down and write yourself a letter in the third person, as if you were a friend or a loved one. So highlight all the great things about yourself, your values, the contributions that you make, all the great things that you're known for. So I hope that you do that you actually sit down and write yourself that letter. Write it on, don't type it on your computer, but write it on a piece of paper or in your journal. And I'd like you to think about it in about a month. Find it in a month and read it. Or if at some point you're feeling down, you're not feeling that you're being very compassionate towards yourself, actually pull it out and read it. Those kind of things are so affirming. With one of my clients, I had him create a manifesto about who he was, what was important to him, what he stood for, and the contribution that he makes to the world. And it was really interesting. He took quite a lot of time to do it. And when he did it, it was so helpful to him. So when he got stressed, he was confused, he was overwhelmed, he would pull the manifesto out from his drawer in his office and he'd read it. And it would ground him back in who he was and what was important to him. It was incredibly powerful. So finally, this is a question that I always ask at the end of my coaching sessions, also my training sessions, is what commitments are you making to yourself as a result of attending this session? So I'd like you to put in the chat box some commitments that you're making. So are you going to change something? Are you going to become more aware? Are you going to read up on this topic? What are you going to do? So you spent almost an hour together. I hope it was of value. And what are you going to take away?
Well, there's some great comments coming in. I do have a question here, though. Is there an optimal window to keep the love letter on read for?
I honestly don't think so. I just thought a month, but if personally, if I've been feeling down, I try and pull out things that I know are going to help me look at myself differently and be more compassionate.
Okay. A lot of people are they're going to write myself the love letter. I'm going to do the manifesto. Someone wanted to know, can you recommend a book on self-compassion?
Actually, Kristen Neff, she seems to be the, I hate to say the word guru, but she's incredibly well known in this field. So she has some amazing materials on her website, as well as a number of books that she's written. And also some of the research that I found actually was empirical research that she has done. So she's definitely the real thing. So I would Google Kristen Neff and see what there is. I think she's got some videos as well.
Someone had just put in any of Kristen Neff's books are great. So
there you go. We're on the same page.
On that one.
That's great.
Someone wants, sorry, let me just have a look. Can you go back to the self-compassion checklist, please? Somebody wants to.
Oh, sure.
There. And just so you know, that was from Susan. Susan, these are all self-recorded. So if you do want to listen to this later and for yourself as well, you most certainly can. Please type her name. Her name there, Erin typed her name, Heike. Someone wanted to please type her name in the window. So when somebody says, I'm going to write myself a love letter, I'm also going to be conscious of the expectations I set and communicate to my daughters. I don't want to perpetuate my inadequacies with them. And then, someone says an outstanding presentation, Wilma, thank you. Someone's going to focus on value adding skills. Oh, and so, wow, great point. What are we teaching our daughters on that one? That's good. Yeah. Lead by example.
So what we know, and this was really more of a personally focused conversation, but we know in the corporate world that the definition of leadership is really changing, and the expectations of leadership are changing, and they're changing to incorporate a lot of these elements that we talked about, just in terms of compassion, caring, being vulnerable, not feeling like the leader has to be perfect, sharing some of the challenges they've had. So it used to be that the leader had to have the answer to every question, had to be positive, and could show no vulnerability. And that is really, really changing in the workplace, I've noticed. And I think it's a great thing. And I think a lot of the elements that we talked about today are part of that process and that change. I'd just like to leave you with one thought. The quality of our emotions determines the instructions that our heart sends to our brain. And so all of the elements of our human system, our bodies, are all tied together. And I think it's something that it's important not to forget. They all interact with each other, and they're all going to have an impact. So emotionally, how you feel about yourself is going to color things like self-image, self-esteem, how we show up. It's just so important. So back to either Ines or Wendy with the close.
Thank you very much, Wilma, for that great webinar. Looking back on what you mentioned, I think it's, for me, the tip that really helped is when we do go through something negative is to suspend that self-judgment, realize that, we have some pain and we're feeling horrible about it, and try to kind of address that sort of separately, get ourselves to feel a bit better before we actually go ahead and then deal with the actual situation, before we kind of come up with solutions, because that will allow us to not go into that negative self-spiral, to be able to focus on some of the positive, and to actually really learn some lessons out of what might have gone wrong there, right? As opposed to just having a very negative reaction to the whole thing, and maybe taking away the wrong lessons in that. And I think that's been a really great takeaway for me. So thank you very, very much for that. We also want to thank everyone who attended. As we've mentioned before, we do record these sessions, so you can actually see all of them. If you go to our LinkedIn page for WomenIN or Facebook, we do have them posted there. We also have them posted on our blog at womenin.ca. I want to thank our sponsors again, and also our board members and our team for putting this together. It is the last webinar in our Take Lead Role for Your Whole Self series, but we are planning on having more webinars for you guys next year, so stay tuned for all of that. And as mentioned, we are also going to have a prize draw next week. And that's for the people who have attended the webinars and who have registered as members to WomenIN. If you want to register, you can go to our website at womenin.ca. And I want to thank you again very much for attending.
Thank you, Ines.
Take care, everyone.
Hang on.
Oh, hang on,
Oh.
Candida.
Thank you. Thank you, Ines. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We're definitely going to be missing our Wednesday lunch dates. But like Ines said, we are going to have quite a few more planned for the new year. Just really want to thank everyone. Wilma, thank you so much. And for those of you that don't know, Wilma is just one of the, great, assets that we have on our board meetings and as a board member, and really has done quite a bit. So thank you, everybody, for giving us your time. All the sponsors for sponsoring us and believing in us. This has been such a successful series and webinars that really we've gotten amazing feedback. So thank you very much, everyone. Hi, thank you for joining us today. This video was brought to you by WomenIN and Calgary's Business, featured on MegaPixx.